President Joe Biden certainly has an economic plan, as does Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. But the question is, who's going to address inflation? That and more today on the BizPo Show. I'm Dan Geltrude from New York City. Welcome back to the BizPo Show. I'm here with my partner in crime. Seth.
Or not. No FBI raids around here. No, we're good.
So Seth, what's going on?
Hey man, just enjoying this little springtime Texas. We got a lot of rain going on these days. It's beautiful. You don't like the weather, just stick around for about 5 minutes. It's going to change. You know, life is good. Life is good. Just, expecting to pay a little bit more in gas and milk and eggs, fabric softener,
Well, and taxes too. A rich guy like you, it's about time you start paying your fair share, Seth. You've been taking advantage. Yeah. You've been taking advantage of the system, and it's not right.
Yeah, thanks, America's accountant. I appreciate that. No, listen. Hey, listen. I am all for fair share. And certainly everyone should be ready to do that. I'm assuming we're referring to last week, President Biden's wonderful address to, what was it, an eighth of Congress? But hey, we got to socially distance. I thought, listen, he gave about as good of a feel-good speech as he could. It was short on facts, but big on feelings. And, playing the main line that we hear time and time again from Democrats, which is that the rich are evil and they need to pay more. And, unfortunately, the math doesn't always work out that way. They are paying more. But nonetheless, I guess more isn't good enough.
Well, speaking of socially distancing, I was socially distancing myself from that speech because I literally just couldn't take it. I had to just catch the highlights, Seth, because I couldn't do it. I knew it was going to be about class warfare, and I just don't have the stomach for that. And no matter how good it was meant to feel, I just didn't feel like it was going to feel good. But speaking of feeling good or not, I think one of the big issues out there right now is whether Joe Biden's economic plans, which to me don't really seem aligned with Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, how this is going to work out. Because what I'm seeing, Seth, is we are heading down the road, and by the way, I think we're there, but we are heading down the road to an inflationary period. Now, you could have these economists come on TV and they have these maps or whatever you want to call it, and X's and lines crossing. I don't know what any of that means. What I do know is this: the stuff I want to buy is getting more expensive. And I'm sure a lot of other people are feeling that as well. That's inflation. I don't care what other fancy definition anybody wants to give. How are you seeing this?
Yeah, I agree. Listen, inflation is here. Everybody's talking about, well, inflation's coming. Inflation's here. And I think what we've got here, we've got a kind of a 1-2 combo that's happening, right? So, and I know that you and I talked about this last week a little bit on a news segment that we did together with John Bachman, but, is that a lot of times when we look at where the economy was during COVID, we thought, well, the economy stalled. No, this wasn't 2008. This wasn't 1980. The economy was turned off. And so what do? Well, unfortunately, the actions that President Trump took and that President Biden literally picked up the mantle and then just ran with was throw cash at the problem, flood the market with liquidity. And that's like flooding a car that you're trying to restart. This car didn't stall, it was just turned off. And if you pump that gas too much, you're going to flood the engine. And I think that's what's happening here. So the combo of massive liquidity with an economic system that had been stopped means you get what's called the whiplash effect. That means that the demand is there, but there's just not enough stuff, whether that be factories went offline for social distancing, whether that be that mining was delayed, whether that mean that those goods and services were slow in getting transported. Regardless, there is high demand, low quantity, high liquidity. That's going to lead to massive inflation, and that's a big problem going forward.
I couldn't say it any better than that, Seth. That's exactly what's going on. This is classic uh, supply and demand going down the road of inflation. And what everyone should realize, Joe Biden has said many times, he's not going to raise taxes on anyone making less than 400,000. Well, I got news for you, Mr. President. Inflation is a tax. It lowers take home pay for everyone because if the things that you want to purchase cost more, it leaves you with less. No different than taxes. And I think the direction that we're going in is going to take us right to that path. I'm even going to go one step further and say when we get past this pandemic, and that should be relatively soon, fingers crossed, but I think we're getting there, and the economy really goes into overdrive, we are going to overheat the economy with too much demand, not enough supply, and I think we're looking at the danger of a hyperinflationary period.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, personally, I think that's why the Fed has taken the position they are. I mean, in a normal scenario where you would see the economic bouncing back and growth, I mean, goodness, GDP was just announced as 6% growth. This is the time where you would normally start to see the Fed raise interest rates to offset inflation, right? That's the normal process here. Instead, what's the Fed doing? They're buying a ton of treasury bonds, right? They're pumping money into the system. And I think that that's strategic. And again, I haven't spoke to it, but I think Jerome Powell is looking at it going, if Biden gets his way with these economic policies and we continue to print money and send money into the market, that is going to create an inflationary period like none has ever seen. And I think what Jerome Powell is hedging the time on this and saying, I'm going to have to do some drastic moves soon. I'm going to hold off as long as possible.
I agree, Seth. But time is going to tell. And unfortunately, our eggs are in the basket of the federal government. And that goes to the point that the federal government just has absolutely too much control, too much say over the economy. The economy will do just fine if you leave it alone. So we will be right back with our guest today, Holly Raschein. I think we're in for for a treat for our listeners. So we'll be right back.
Well, the political and economic headwinds are gale force these days. So what does that mean for you? To weigh in on this, our guest this week is former Florida State Representative and current Republican strategist, Holly Raschein. Holly, how are you?
Hi, how's it going, Seth? Good to be here
Great to
today.
have you here with us. Well, listen, all eyes are on Florida these days, right? Not that they aren't always, Florida being a swing state and all, but nonetheless, all eyes are on Florida these days because of how you guys have handled the pandemic, your economic growth. Seems like if people aren't moving to Texas, they're moving to Florida. So as a veteran in Florida state politics, tell us, what is Florida doing so well that the rest of the country just should learn from it?
Thank you, Seth. And that's a wonderful question. And all eyes should be on Florida, right? It's a wonderful, beautiful state. And under the leadership of Governor DeSantis, we have really sort of weathered this global pandemic, if you will. And I wouldn't say that our state has been reckless in any sense, but we have been targeted in certain areas that are important on keeping our lives and our way of life going. Schools, keeping businesses open, keeping places of worship going. And I really have to give hats off to a former speaker that I served under, Education Commissioner Richard Corcoran. He has been a warrior and a huge champion, especially in our schools, whether we're talking about preschools or K through 8s, high schools, and making sure that our kids are able to succeed and even excel in these very strange times. I myself have a 9-year-old, and he's in 3rd grade. He's playing baseball right now in Little League. And even though his school has been open since September, I noticed a little bit of a change in him. Not that he's necessarily behind, but I do, hats off to Commissioner Corcoran, to Governor DeSantis for really taking such a strong stance on maintaining as much openness as it was safe, for our businesses, for our economy, for travel. Tourism is so important to the state of Florida. It's our number one economic engine, followed by agriculture and then the military. But again, I think that we are a model for the rest of the nation. If you look at Florida, if you look at Texas, and then you comparatively look at California, New York, Illinois, I think that we have got the winning recipe.
Well, it certainly seems so, and I'm glad you place so much emphasis on what the Florida legislature and the Florida leaders are doing in the state, because I think that a lot of times we focus so much on the national political spectrum, we forget about how much is really done at the state level. The old saying goes, all politics is local. Well, the reality is those state legislatures and those state leaders really drive state economic growth. And again, we seem to want to focus so much on the national level, but nonetheless, let's focus a little bit on the national level for a second. So, last week, President Biden ushered in his 100th day with 2 key achievements as I saw them. First, he spent more money in his first 100 days than any president has before him. And he's also issued more executive orders than any other president. So this, President Biden ran on being a uniter and knowing how to get things done, yet he seems to kind of want to be going things alone. So from that perspective as administration, is that what we should expect going forward in your perspective? Is that what we likely will see from a national level?
Well, I anticipate, right out of the gate, he came out pretty strong and sort of just laid his cards on the table for what he hopes his administration just sort of look like. And I would imagine the coming years will be pretty similar. And I think my takeaway from the campaign was that he was hoping to unite our country. Our country was sort of on it. I don't even want to say on its knees. That's a bit strong, but everybody's sort of in this languish mode. And we're hoping to maybe see a little bit of unification. And it seems like he's really doing good unifying his own party. But there's a whole country out there that needs strong leadership. And going back to your original comment before the question, the 10th Amendment, we got to love that. And giving some autonomy to the states and allowing these states to sort of move forward and tailor public policy in these extreme times, I think is incredibly important. And so some of what you see in President Biden's moves are very blanket. They're very broad brush. And again, in a nation like America, we need to be able to tailor some of our policies. And I think that the times that we are in now just sort of, highlights that. And I unfortunately see a lot of partisanship when, passing a COVID relief plan, you would think you would want that to be bipartisan. In times like this, you never want to see the pendulum swing too far either way, right? Everybody's affected by this pandemic. Let's search for solutions that benefit everyone, not one side or the other. Everybody's hurting. Everybody feels strange. Let's unite.
Holly, you've seen the president's infrastructure plan. Is there anything in that plan that you think you could support?
Well, okay, so that's a pretty broad question, and yes, right? So in a typical piece of legislation, there's always good and bad parts, and what it really comes down to is the devil is in the details. And I prefer, when I was in office, and I'm a former staffer, we preferred to put resources towards projects that were shovel ready. We want to see shovels in the ground. We want to see dirt turning. We want to see roads going up, bridges being repaired. We don't want to necessarily have liberal, or if you were on the other side, conservative policies sprinkled in there that have nothing to do with infrastructure. Again, our nation is starting to age, And we are noticing that in the infrastructure across our country, whether it is sewers or stormwater, roads, bridges, things like that. I would prefer to see actual infrastructure projects on the list and not necessarily using this as a vehicle to accomplish other things that should probably be debated in other ways.
Holly, let's switch the topic to something that has obviously been very hot, and that's immigration. So, based upon the district in Florida that you've represented, I'm sure you have some pretty strong feelings about this. What do you think that first, that the administration, this administration should be focused in on? And two, what do you think that they could actually do to solve this challenge?
Well, Dan, I don't know that there's an easy answer to that question. What I do know and what we heard from the president's remarks to Congress was that, you know, guns are bad, open borders are good. And I'm not sure that that's actually the case because the debacle that we're seeing right now unfold at our borders is a travesty. And obviously, in Florida, we're no stranger to immigration woes. We are a coastal state. The district that I represented in the Florida House was all coast, right? I represented the Florida Keys. We're nothing but an island chain, an archipelago, lots of access to other countries, especially Cuba, and then obviously southern Miami-Dade County, which is a hotbed for all things related to immigration. Even the homestead facility was there in my district. And I think that policies that sort of go in line with President Obama's failed wet foot, dry foot immigration policy, it was not only a failure, but it was deadly. In the Keys, for example, we have witnessed migrants coming over and very, very sad situations, very ill, out of water, dehydrated, starving, styrofoam rafts that wash ashore that maybe you see a remnant of maybe a human life, a backpack or a shoe. I mean, that's completely unacceptable. And I think that more sound policies need to be in place, and just ripping off the Band-Aid and just opening our borders is clearly not working. And we need to ratchet this down soon, so that more lives aren't lost or ruined.
Holly, I want to get your take on climate change in large part. So you hail from arguably one of my favorite states, Alaska, right? I didn't consider myself anyone that was all that concerned with the environment till my first time I went to Alaska, and I went, wow, this is impressive. This is what clean air really feels like. But now you hail from one of my other favorite states, which, as you mentioned, very coastal. Your district was coastal. I think, in my personal opinion on this, is that climate change is one area that I think Republicans fall short on. I think this is something that we could certainly be more engaged in the conversation, and there's a balance between fiscal policy and climate policy. But where can Republicans find that balance and strike it? And is that a position that you think we should focus more on as Republicans?
Absolutely, Seth. And I know how to pick my states, don't I? And just in my lifetime, I've seen the face of Alaska change, if you will, and the melting of the glaciers. And I don't think anybody denies that the planet is changing, right? And it could be because of people, it can be because of natural causes. That debate will always continue. But climate change, I think, is one area where both parties can unite. Who doesn't want to have clean air? Who doesn't want to have clean water? Who doesn't want to have beautiful parks or beaches to go to? I mean, that's a no-brainer. But how we get there, I think, is, again, the big discussion that needs to be held or had. And the Green New Deal, maybe that's not the best way. I'm thinking maybe we empower the private sector. Anytime you get that sort of free market energy going, you're going to have solutions come out of that, right? There's incentives there, and a lot of capital and a lot of need and a lot of energy, pardon the pun, behind that. And I think just throwing a bunch of money at something isn't necessarily the best move. I think it, again, needs to go back to balance, go back to targeted, go back to shovel-ready projects. There's communities all around our nation, especially in in areas where climate is sort of more it's more timely, it's more pressing, and we need to be more aggressive. Let's look to those communities for guidance that will maybe present a more national plan. But again, I think it's a no-brainer for both parties to unite on this. And again, there's always going to be a debate on what's better or worse. But again, climate change, global warming, whatever you want to call it, it's real. And in my community, we're seeing it. Whether there's a king tide or a full moon with a king tide, we've got sea level rise. Hurricanes are continuing to be more intense, and floods, and so on and so forth. Let's have this, and let's not have too many government mandates. So let's empower the private sector.
Holly, there's so much divisiveness and so much partisanship, as you were alluding to in that last question. Do you think that realistically that we could actually get some bipartisanship on something? I know you're saying, well, everyone is for clean air and clean water, and I believe that's true. However, can we get enough people to agree on things where both sides, a majority of both sides, will come together on some type of legislation anytime soon?
Well, Dan, I think our country yearns for that. I think, my former constituents, Congress, their current constituents, all of us voters, children, whatever, yearn for some cohesiveness and for some unification, especially on important issues like, COVID or infrastructure or climate change, all the things that we've talked about today. We yearn for that. We want that. And I think that it's incumbent upon our national leaders to get their acts together and sit down at the table, agree to disagree, right? That's just how life is. But then let's agree on things that we can actually accomplish. And there are so many experts out there. There are so many good things happening and good projects happening. And why, I ask myself when I scratch my head, and I'm sure people looked at us in Tallahassee going, why can't they get their act together? But again, state politics versus, federal politics, completely different. But I think, yes, it can be done. And I think we need that now.
Holly, I recognize that you termed out of your seat in the House of Representatives in Florida. What's next for you in the political realm?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question. I was approached to run for a couple local offices, but I thought, it might be a good time to sort of tap the brakes on serving in government these days. But it is a passion of mine, and public service is one of those things that really leaves an impression on you and your heart, your family, your life. And were there could there be a position out there that I would run for office again? Absolutely, yes. Right now, I am dabbling in the private sector. Whoa, what a learning curve, but it's really neat. And I just, really want to give a shout out to those that have, decided to serve and are thinking about serving, especially to, my ladies out there who are thinking of running for office. I encourage them 1,000%.
Holly Raschein, thanks for joining us today on the BizPo Show, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing you out there on the campaign trail once again soon. Welcome back to the BizPo Show. Well, as you know, if you're a regular viewer, and if you're not, you're soon to know, Dan and I like to leave you each week with our final thoughts. So here's mine for the week. As the economy starts to open back up and we can get back to life as normal, and as someone who's had both rounds of his vaccine, I enjoyed recently my first opportunity to get back into the gym. Yes, I needed to do that because I think what 2020 did was add at least 20 pounds to me. And I'm eager to get that off, especially as summertime is soon a-coming. But I did remember very quickly one of the things that I don't always enjoy about the gym, and that's etiquette. So a couple tips for those of you that are quickly going back into the gym sphere. First of all, the locker room is not your closet. If you are getting ready to work out, be courteous to the person sitting next to you. you don't need to take up the whole bench just to get ready. Second, it's also not your bathroom. Maybe clip your toenails at home. And third, we're all working with the same equipment. I don't need to see yours the whole time. Hopefully you don't need to see mine either. And then finally, yes, I get that you've had your vaccine and I've got mine, but still wipe up your sweat off the equipment. I don't really need to lay in your puddle as I'm doing my reps. So, again, we're open. Let's have some fun out there. Let's stay happy and healthy and safe, and let's get better in the process. And that's my final thought.
Seth, my final thought actually relates to what you were just saying. I want to talk about level 5 listening. You may not have known that there are 5 levels of listening. I want to focus in on just one, level 5. That is listening at the highest level. It's empathetic listening. It's listening with feeling to understand what the person is saying to you by feeling what they're saying to you. And I think that is what we are really missing in this country, specifically in Washington, D.C. We simply do not have people listening at any level, even level 1. Everybody just wants to do what they want to do, and they are not open-minded to hearing anything else. Until that starts to change, we will not see any change in this country, and we'll continue to see the divisiveness and the partisanship that unfortunately we are becoming too used to. So what I just want to remind everybody out there, if you take the time to listen, to focus, to understand emotionally what someone is saying to you, I think that we could make some real progress in this country. And that's my final thought.
I like it, Dan. Maybe some level 5 listening and level 1 talking, perhaps? Well, that does it for this week's edition of the BizPo Show. We hope you'll tell your friends about us and make sure you tune in same time, same place next week. From Dallas, Texas, I'm Seth Denson.
From New York City, I'm Dan Geltrude. Good night.